Are we expecting Tomas to be here? Don't know. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get going then, because I've got 3 o'clock. So it is Wednesday, May 31st, 2023. It's 3 o'clock, and this is the May meeting of the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District Board. This time, I'll ask for a roll call.
Barnes.
Here.
Chaplin. Here. Delgado. Fasella.
Present.
Hannon.
Here.
Nudo.
Here till 3:45.
Isle.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to approve our agenda for today's meeting with a motion and a second, please.
I move we approve the agenda as distributed.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda for today's meeting. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Any audience participation? We do have some audience members, but we're going to talk about them shortly. Our next item is approval of our minutes from our open session, April 26, 2023. It's been moved and seconded to approve the open session board meeting minutes from April 26, 2023. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. And our next are our closed session board meeting minutes from April 26, 2023. Motion?
Seconded.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the closed session board meeting minutes from April 26, 2023 that were distributed before the meeting for your perusal. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Communications, Carl. Any board members have any communications they'd like to share? Seeing none, we'll move into the MTD Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee.
For this, our HR Director, Jacinta Cromer, is going to be coming up, and her co-presenter is Tanawa Penn, who is one of our operators, and I think they'll probably introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. We're pleased to be here to present about our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'm Jacinta Cromer, HR Director.
And I am Tanawa Penn, bus operator, among other duties I hold at MTD.
Okay, we have a presentation that I'll ask to get pulled up. And Tanawa's going to start.
Okay. Before I go into the presentation and the background and the goals of the DEI committee, it's important to define the items and the terms. What is diversity, equity, and inclusion? Diversity, all the ways that people are different: gender, gender identity, ethnicity, language, sexual orientation, disabilities, neurodiversity, socioeconomics, status, age, religion, location, or veteran status. Equity, fairness and justice in the way people are treated, processes, programs, opportunities, and advancement should be impartial and offer equal access. Equity should be removed so everyone can reach their full potential. Inclusion, everyone has a sense of belonging in the group and feels welcome to participate. Inclusive environments are those in which differences are embraced and supported and people feel like they can bring their truth and selves to work.
Next slide.
About my committee background, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion DEI Committee was created in the summer of 2022. The goal of creating a more equitable and inclusive organization. Over the time, the committee, a diverse and dedicated group of employees, will work to identify issues, plan future trainings, events, and organize celebrations with their goals in mind. Next slide. Our committee is a group of 18 employees that represent the entire organization. As you can see, these employees joined this committee because they are invested in DEI work and goals. The committee meets monthly since we began in June of 2022. Next slide, please. Committee goals. The committee spent a couple meetings identifying definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The committee members, individuals, identified areas of improvement, and then we combined them all into one large list. From the large list, members then selected their top areas of importance for initial focus. The top 3 items were then selected as our first goals, which you see here. Research and evaluate hiring practices and job descriptions to create a more diverse and inclusive process. Examine and evaluate policies and practices to ensure equity and inclusion. Create a communication plan and strategy, both internal and external, related to DEI. Also, prepare a proposal for recognition and observance of Juneteenth.
Okay, so that gives you a little background about our DEI committee and when it started and our membership. And of course, our main 3, essentially 4 goals, because we're focused on Juneteenth. I'm going to take a step back and frame it out in terms of the American Public Transportation Association, which is APTA. You've probably heard us talk about APTA through the years. APTA is an organization that was established in 1974, and so it's nearly celebrating its 50th birthday. It evolved from other organizations that date all the way back actually to 1882. So it includes over 1,500 public and private sector member organizations, and they provide advocacy for federal funding, policies, research, technical expertise, consulting, workforce development, conferences, seminars, pretty much everything under the sun. So it's a wonderful organization for us to be a part of, and they organize and oversee 135 subject matter committees, of which many of us participate in them. So I'm part of the Workforce Development Committee, and I'm also part of the next committee, which, next slide, sort of frames this whole work that we're doing on DEI. So the Racial Equity Commitment Program is an APTA pilot program. It was established, let me go forward here. It was established because of APTA's strategic plan. The APTA organization wanted to develop a future-ready, inclusive, and diverse leadership and workforce. And they saw themselves as being aptly positioned to provide that leadership in their role. So in this area, to organizations across the country, transit organizations across the country. So in order to do this work, they implemented a racial equity commitment program, and it's a 2-year pilot. Next slide. Really, this commitment program, that's what they call it for short, the Racial Equity Commitment Program, is all about improving. We're a very large committee. As Tanawa pointed out, we have 18 members, so we ended up dividing into 2 subcommittees to divvy up the work. We created the Juneteenth Celebration Committee, which is just planning the employee celebration, the company-wide celebration for employees and families, and that's headed up by Sasha Green, our lead human resources specialist. And then we created an outreach and education committee, which is headed up by Amy Snyder, our chief of staff. Next slide. So this is the Juneteenth Celebration Subcommittee. We've got a great event planned. I'll share extra details with the board in case any of you would like to come. But we're inviting all MTD employees and their families. We plan on having a cookout, lots of great food. We're going to have special readings, hopefully from the Urbana Poet Laureates who composed special poems just for MTD. We have a Juneteenth mobile bus exhibit that explains Juneteenth and honors it with some wonderful graphics that Tanawa will show you here in a minute. We're going to share the history behind Juneteenth and the history of the Juneteenth flag. We've got a DJ booked. We've got bouncy houses. We're going to make this fun with games and activities and all sorts of fun things just to really honor and celebrate this. And it's a great way for our employees to get together too. Next slide.
As you were told about our outreach and education subcommittee, as you see, this is some of the events that we will be participating in, especially with the Champaign Park District and Urbana Park District on Juneteenth. So we're going to split it up and be at two places at one time. And then also we're going to do the MLK JD Rhodes Neighborhood Day. Next slide. This is one of the, I don't know if it's on the king or queen side, but this is one of the Kongs that we have on the buses. And I think that it's really great to celebrate Juneteenth, Freedom Day, June 19th. This bus has a mobile exhibit on board, and take a journey with us to learn about Juneteenth. Next slide. This is some of the poems that have been written. Some of them are by historical authors. Others are even by our own employees. You guys want to read that over? And these are displayed on the buses as well. Next slide. And as you can see, some of the display, we have one bus that is displayed with a lot of the historic sayings and poems from Juneteenth. Lots of pictures. Next slide. Next slide, please. And this is some of the committee members. This is the King side of the King Kong side of the bus. And some of the DEI committee members that were able to be at that meeting and able to take pictures because the rest of us was, the rest of them were out serving the community. And we are very proud to work and that we have done, we're very proud of the work we have done so far, but we're just getting started. We have lots of goals and work to do. You will certainly see us back here again with goals, action items, and to share data on our progress. We look forward for your support now and in the future. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our presentation about the DEI committee. Do you have any questions for us?
Any questions from the board? Bruce?
This is a wild, wild suggestion. How about taking the bus that you're going to have for this and turning all the seats around so that the back of the bus is the front? And that's a very important thing on the 6th Juneteenth.
That's an interesting suggestion. I'd have to take that up with our maintenance director and see if we, an operations director.
It's just 4 bolts for each one and you turn them around. But when somebody gets on, hey, go to the back,
Yeah,
it's the front.
good.
Any
Other questions?
other questions from the board? Alan?
Yeah, I think it was a wise decision not closing because the bus service is a social safety net for many people to get to their work, and it's a necessary thing that we have to provide, I think, to the public, and that's why I think we're here. But on the other hand, I could see offering free bus rides for that day.
I think that's a great idea. Yes.
I think that would probably give as much credence to how we feel about it to the public and for the day.
Would be impactful too for people.
Very
Certainly.
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else from the board on this? Go ahead, Phil.
I think this diversity committee thing is kind of cool. Are they thinking about doing this annually, or like maybe next year they could do Cinco de Mayo for Hispanic employees, or Columbus Day for Italians, or Kashmir Pulaski Day, something like that, and do a bus and do a cookout and stuff?
The DEI committee is certainly an ongoing committee, and so we wanted to, of course, tackle Juneteenth because it's a new federal holiday and recognize it. And then we've got lots of other plans.
Yes.
So we're excited about putting out the climate assessment and finding out what our employees want and finding ways to make it feel inclusive for all employees. So yeah, I would expect us to address other holidays too.
Very nice, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else from the board? All right. Thank
you.
you both for your for your presentation and the entire committee for their work.
I think you'd make it into the New York Times if you turned the seats around.
All right. Our next item is the managing director's report. Carl.
Thank you. Let me apologize in advance for my froggy throat and my cough. I will try to not cough in the microphone. I have one of those wonderful spring colds. All right, we've got a lot on the agenda, so I'm going to try to breeze through this fairly quickly. This information is for April, and there were 897,373 rides in April. That's a 10% increase over April of the previous year. Our fiscal year to date ridership, officially at the end of April, the year-to-date ridership is greater than the entire last year's ridership. So that's significant since we still have May and June left on it. Of course, May and June is not full university service, and so the ridership in those months that's quite a bit less than what we normally see, but still seeing improvements. Okay, this is just that graphic that we've been looking at the last, I don't know, year and a half or so now, where you can see our high point pre-pandemic, and then the annual ridership of every year. This is not a full annual ridership, but the year-to-date ridership through April, as we continue to grow back the ridership. All right, the operating revenue was 19.8% above April 2022. And the year-to-date operating revenue was 7.5% above FY 2022. So that also is looking strong. The operating expenses for the month of April were 4.8% above April of 2022. And the year-to-date operating expenses are 6.9% above FY 2022 through April. The year-to-date revenue and expenses, the revenues were at the end of April were $1.1 million above budget, and operating expenses are $5.8 million below budget. And of course, as we talk about every month, it's because we budgeted for full service and full employment, and we're still not at full service or full employment. And so that's why there's such a gap between what our actual expenses are and what our budgeted expenses were. With that, I'm going to stop there, and I'll take any questions through page 33 before we move into the draft budget.
Questions on Carl's report? Seeing none, Carl, move right into your budget.
All righty. These are just some quick summary notes that are general purpose for this upcoming year's budget. A couple that I want to point out.
You're on page 34 in our handout. This page
yes,
here.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Page 34. We'll be going through page 34 to 42. Or you can watch the screens. Same information. Same as the current year, we continue to struggle with our labor shortage. And so we are budgeting for full employment, we are budgeting for full service, but we are not yet at that point, but we have made some wage adjustments and policy adjustments that we are hopeful will help with retention and recruitment of operators. And so some of the costs reflected in this budget are as a result of the retention and recruitment plans. Medical insurance premiums, we saw a pretty significant jump this year. These are actuals, not just estimates. We have next year's rates already, and we saw an average of approximately 8%. The reason it's an approximation is because we have multiple plans, and different plans, the increase was different for each one. Some were a little higher than 8%, some were a little lower than 8%. The excess liability insurance, as I've been also telling you about for the last couple of years, we are struggling mightily with that. We participate in the Illinois Public Transit Risk Fund, which is a self-insured insurance pool that we and 3 other transit agencies in the state of Illinois participate in. We just accepted our agreement with our current contractor to renew with them, the carrier, and they were the only bidder. And so this is a theme that we have been seeing over and over again. In fact, next month, we'll be bringing to you a retroactive approval for our auditing agreement, and the same thing happened with our auditing RFP. We got one proposer. We sent it out to dozens, and we received one back. And we talked to all of those other firms, and they all said, we don't have enough employees. We can't do it. We can't bid. And so that's a little bit of a different situation than the insurance, but at the end of the day, we're getting single bids, which not the best competitive environment, but not a lot we can do about it. Okay, I think with that, I will move on before my throat gives out. All right, this is an overview of the entire budget. So we have 4 departments that we budget for: operations, maintenance, administration, and Illinois terminal. You have two terms in here that are similar: operations and operating. Operations is the department. Operating is all of the non-capital expenditures. So we have an operating budget and a capital budget. And we'll go into more depth on each of these departments as we move forward. Next slide. This is the top part of our estimate of revenues and expenses. So this is the operating budget, and it shows our operating revenues. The state operating grant is equivalent to 65% of our eligible expenses. That is budgeted, not actual. So, you know, we likely won't draw down that much because we won't actually spend our whole budget because we're not at full employment. The next slide then shows the corresponding operating expenses. And sorry, excuse me just a minute. He's not going to be able to get back in. Could somebody stand by the door and let him back in? Yeah, I can. Or propping it open would be fine. Yeah. Oh, you think he left? Okay.
So once Al leaves?
Yeah, we'll still have a quorum once Al leaves, as long as none of the rest of you leave. Sorry for that disruption. Where was I? Let me look at the screen here. Okay, we were talking about operating expenses. This is the totality of the budgeted expenses, which is a plan for what we hope to be able to spend. But if we're not at full employment and we're not at full service, then of course we won't spend to that amount. But it also includes, remember, the quirk of our state operating grant is we do have some capital expenses that are considered debt service, and so they're funded with operating funds, but they're actually capital projects. So that's what's listed in the eligible debt service there. And then we have, as always, some ineligible operating expenses. These are expenses that are ineligible for the Downstate Operating Assistance Program through the state. Many of them are related to Illinois terminal operations that are not transportation or public transit oriented, but we have some at 1101 and across the district as well. Okay.
The print's
Next.
too small.
Sorry?
The print is too small.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The print is too small.
Oh, the print is too small? Okay, I apologize, I can't adjust that right now. It is in your packet, so everything that you see on the screen is in your packet in front of you too. Okay. Moving on to capital. Nope. I guess I reserved capital for the end of the discussion. This is operations, the operations department. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This makes up a significant portion of our budget increase from last year to this year. The wages and the fringe benefits that are associated with these retention and recruitment efforts. And so this budget line item, the wage budget line item, is $1.8 million higher than last year's budget. That is because we shortened the progression rate, we added the experience credit, and we had 4% COLA. Moving on to fringe benefits, that generally would have increased as well as the wages, but as we were budgeting, we realized that there was that line item was a little oversized, and so we did some right sizing and actually reduced that by $435,000. Moving on to services, this is really the only thing to note here is the half-fare cab program is continuing to become more and more anemic. It's basically on life support at this point. There is one taxi cab operation in Champaign-Urbana that is participating in the program. So it's limping right now with that one operator, but at least there is that one operator. Ridership is continuing to decrease. Materials and supplies, this is, I'll be honest with you, this is just a shot in the dark or throwing a dart at a board when I try to figure out what fuel is going to be over a 12-month period. I just don't have a crystal ball that works that well, so I ended up landing on keeping it the same amount this budget because we're significantly under budget, even though we saw early in the fiscal year really high fuel prices. They've really come down, and they've kind of remained pretty flat. Now, that may change again, but I think we have an average here that is protective, yes.
Can you do what some of the big companies do with use energy, is contract for energy at a certain price over a year?
Yeah, we absolutely can, and my experience is that would not be good for us because you lock in at a rate, and if you lock in at a low rate and then prices go up, you're golden until the next time that your contract comes due, and then they bump you up, and so you get smacked in the face at that point. But primarily where you get really hit is when you lock in. Like if we had been bidding a month or two ago and we locked in at the current prices, and if prices go down over the next 12 months, we hit a recessionary period and prices go down, and we're still paying that high rate. And when I was at Danville Mass Transit, we had contracts like that, and we almost always ended up paying more than what we would have if we did the spot checking like we do here.
You don't go for the current price. You go for some negotiated price.
Yep. I'm aware of how it works. It generally is not positive for the budget.
A lot of big companies do it. Do it year after year, you're okay.
Maybe. I mean, we're okay too doing the spot checking, I would argue. Okay, I think just moving on to the final part of the operations budget, we have Just a couple of miscellaneous line items. Tech, can we move on to that? There we go. And then, so the total operations budget is $1.3 million over the current budget. That's a 4.4% increase. Moving on to our second largest department, that's maintenance. And so this is going to be very, very similar to the operations department, just a smaller scale. So the wage line item is an increase of $485,000. That's because of the 4% COLA, the experience credit, and the progression rate, the shortening of the progression rate. Moving on to fringe benefits, this line item was not inflated like the operations one was, so there isn't a right sizing like we did, and that actually increased by $144,000 to be in line with the wage line item. Services increased slightly. That's the O&M agreement for the solar array was just slightly more than what I had anticipated that it would be, but the line item, sorry, can we move on to services tech? Thank you. That it just went up $10,000. The materials and supplies consumed, this one is, again, somewhat similar to operations. I actually think the fuel will be a little better off because we just, this summer, we're disposing of, we've taken out of service now the last 4 2001 articulated diesel buses. And so we now have 0 fully diesel buses, and so that they're our last diesel guzzlers that we finally have gotten rid of, and so our consumption will go down for operations, and the revenue vehicle repairs, that's where taking those diesel hybrid, or the diesel Arctics out of service, that's where that saves money in maintenance because we don't have to maintain those 22-year-old buses anymore. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So we have an increase in the maintenance budget of $568,000. That's a 5.6% increase. Moving on to the next department is our general administration department. Wages are up $198,000. That primarily is because we made some adjustments as a result of the compensation study that we did last year. And the fringe benefits, of course, just are in line with the wages. Moving on to services, that's up $90,000. Sorry, and this is where the solar O&M shows up, not in the maintenance one. So this is a $90,000 increase in services. The materials and supplies consumed is a moderate increase of $40,000, and then the next line item is insurance. That's a $10,000 increase, and if we can, there we go, insurance, and the miscellaneous line item is up $392,000. That primarily is because of, you can see the utility line item. That's a $400,000 increase in that line item all by itself. Utility rates continue to go up, and we'll be taking on more demand charges that we pay to Ameren for when we're running our electrolyzer, our hydrogen electrolyzer during the evening. We'll be using our solar credits, but we still pay the transportation charge or the demand charge to use their power lines to draw power from the grid overnight. And we'll be running that electrolyzer 24/7. So the total G&A expense went up 9.4%, or $775,000. Moving on to Illinois Terminal. My term for Illinois Terminal is always small but mighty. This is our smallest department, but they're the the crown jewel of the district and for downtown Champaign, and so they do a lot with what they have. And just real quick, you can see what we've got there for wages and fringe benefits, and I've repeated myself several times about retention and recruitment. Moving on to services. That is a moderate increase of $10,000. Material supplies is a $2,000 increase, and a small increase in utilities. That's just drawdown on power for Illinois Terminal. So the total Illinois Terminal budget is a 6.4% increase, or $105,500. This page is the least interesting page in the budget. It's just a quick rundown of the ineligible expenses. It's the non-public transit-oriented expenses that the district incurs, and so they're not eligible for our state grant. Okay, and then we follow the least interesting with probably the most interesting. This is the capital budget. This first section, and we're getting close to the end. This is the last section. This is for debt service projects. I mentioned these earlier. These are capital projects that are funded through our operating budget because we borrow money to pay for these projects, and that debt service, the principal and interest, is eligible as an operating expense through our state grant. And so these are mostly just remaining projects. For instance, that hydrogen fuel cell pilot project. I don't think we're going to make it by July 1, but it's in the budget because if we don't make, June 30, if we don't complete that by June 30 and we trip over into even just July 1, then it's a FY24 expense. But we are scrambling trying to get that completed by the end of June, so fingers crossed. Moving on to the next section, this is local capital. So these are items that we draw down directly from our capital reserve to pay for. These are generally catch-all line items for things like architectural and engineering services, bus stop shelter and kiosk work, and just facility improvements that come up throughout the year. The next section these are federal capital grants, and you can see many of these are projects that have been ongoing that you've already approved, like the 10 hydrogen buses that will be going online in July, and we hope to receive by the end of the calendar year. So all of these are either projects that you've approved or projects that we've applied for the funds. And so they need to be in the budget because the federal government looks to see if they're in the budget when they look at our application. But if we don't get the funding, then we won't be bringing these to you for approval, and we won't incur the expenses. All right, moving on to the next one.
So Carl, it's about 1/5 of the federal. Local is 1/5 of the federal.
No, Tech, can you go back one slide? So that it's, you said, is the local share 1/5 of the total?
Yeah.
Yes, it's an 80-20 match.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so most of these are 80-20. There is a quirky thing with that hydrogen bus that actually has some of the ARPA funds, the COVID relief funding in it, and that's eligible for 100%, but it's only for a few of the buses in that procurement, and so that percentage is a little different in that one, but all the rest of them are 80-20.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now, moving on to the next section, this is a little different because these are federally funded, but they're 100% federal. And that is because this is using the ARPA grant that we received as COVID relief funding. So these are all 100%. No. What's that? No, it's, you don't have your mic on. So the replace external panels is at 1101, our administrative building. And if you recall, that building was built in the 60s. And there's this rock aggregate aesthetic, I guess, from 1960, whatever, that is starting to crumble and fall apart. And so it's just taking those off. I will tell you though, Phil, we late breaking news that we didn't have time to make any change in the budget. That actually isn't going to be funded by federal funds. We're probably going to do that with local funds because it turned out we needed a historical review. And so we just, if it was federally funded, and so we decided not to go through the pain and agony of that, and we'll just fund it. We'll fund it locally on that. So we'll be bringing that to you for approval, and we'll explain what the source of the funding will be at that time. The project is in the budget. It's just in the wrong category at this point.
Are we still going to use up all of our ARPA money then, or does that leave us?
We'll use the money. I think the money that we have budgeted in the panel replacement will actually go into, I'm looking for it, I'm not seeing it right off the top of my head, but it's for, oh, there it is, vehicle storage floor drain repair at 803. We'll put it in there because there is some additional concrete work that we need, that we can do. We've got just for example, a big panel of concrete as you drive into our bus wash that as a bus goes over it, it's like a seesaw, a teeter-totter, which makes people nervous as they're going over it. Some of the sub-base is washed away, so we need to fix that and replace that. So we'll put the money into that line item and do some additional work that absolutely needs to be done.
Question.
Yep.
I'm looking at the last one, the state grants, and are you there? I guess you're not, well, maybe you are there. And then I'm looking at 10 40-foot hydrogen bus procurement, 13 million, 12 million of which comes from the feds. And then down below it says 10 40-foot bus rebuild, whatever that means, and, oh, the hybrid bus, I'm sorry. Never mind. I was confusing hybrid versus hydrogen.
Yeah,
right on a couple of letters.
so that was the next section I hadn't actually gotten to yet, but Tech, you can advance one more slide. So Bruce was asking about this line item about 10 buses. Why is that different from the earlier line item for 10 buses? The earlier line item was for 10 hydrogen buses. This one is for 10 hybrid buses, right. So diesel electric buses. And so those buses cost less than the hydrogen buses.
I got two letters.
Yeah. And you said rebuild, whatever that is. Rebuild Illinois is a state capital program, and that actually says rebuild 3 because it's round 3 to, excuse me, the rebuild program. Okay, I think that's it for the budget. Pending any other questions.
Questions for Carl on his presentation? Seeing none, we will move into our next item, which is the Decennial Committee on Local Government Efficiency Act.
What's that, Ellen? Do what? No. So we just do a budget review, and then it goes on for public viewing for 30 days, and then we bring it back in June. So the next board meeting will be an action item for approval. And Brad, I'll just turn back to you for the Decennial Committee on Efficiency, unless you want me to kind of summarize what the act is or what it's for.
I could read this little introduction here on the Decennial Act. So this is a committee that is brought about by legislative action that all units of local government that may levy any tax except municipalities and counties to form a committee within 1 year after the effective date of that legislation with the intent that it study the governmental units governing statutes, ordinances, rules, procedures, powers, jurisdiction, shared services, intergovernmental agreements, and interrelationships with other governmental units and the state. So we are required as a unit of government to have this committee. You all are members of said committee, along with two community advocates for transit, and they are Donna Tanner Harold, who's here today, and George Friedman Jr., who's a former board member who's here today. We're super thankful that they've committed to join the committee, and thankful that they're both here today to join us. And I'm not sure do we have any other community members that are going to be a part of ours, or is that the total group?
The statute defines the committee makeup as the entirety of the board, the chief executive officer of the district, so my position, and then two community members at large, and so that's how it's defined, and so this completes the membership of the committee.
And then we will begin meeting probably as soon as possible because we've obviously got some work to do. So that'll be something that's going to be coming up on your calendars for some additional meetings with the committee.
Yeah, I think real quick, if I can just say, I'm hopeful that we will have a meeting in the next month or two of the committee. We'll just do it at a board meeting like this, but our corporate counsel is finishing up a scope of services for an RFP to go out to bid with a consultant to do the actual work of this. And so the committee will review that scope of services and talk about what you think is appropriate and not appropriate. The act is super vague and broad when it comes to what the work of the committee is to entail. And so, I think we'll have that initial conversation to kind of work through that. I don't think it'll take very long, but just to finalize that. And then we'll go out to bid, and then we'll meet again as a committee to decide who we want to select. Hopefully we get more than one bid, and we'll be able to select from the proposers who to award that contract to.
Phil.
Do you think this is something we need to get a contractor for, or do we just need to meet? I mean, I don't know, another governmental agency I'm involved with, we're just doing sort of 3 add-ons to our monthly board meeting and kind of putting together a little couple-page report. But is it something we've got to spend? I mean, probably talking tens of thousands of dollars on this, right?
Yeah, I don't know yet what the cost would be, and if we take proposals and then the board and the committee decide, we don't need to spend this money, then that's certainly an option that you can take. I guess my thought going into this was that if we were going to do this, let's really do it. And not just kind of throw together a 1 or 2 pager to satisfy the requirement of the act. Let's take an opportunity to kind of get into our policies and make sure that we are doing everything that we're supposed to be doing the way we're supposed to be doing it, and let's try to find as much value out of it as we can get. It's a little more than what the act, I think, necessarily requires, but why not use it as an opportunity to do some self-analysis, I guess.
And you don't really have staff who are available to take on another project right now?
That's the other side of it. I mean, if we do just, the down and dirty version, staff probably could accommodate it. But, yeah, to do the full thing, probably not. And I think it's helpful to have outside eyes come in and look and review what we're doing. I mean, if our staff is reviewing what our staff is doing, then that, maybe that's not the best audit as possible. Not that this is an audit. I shouldn't use that word, but review.
Anything else from the board? But we do welcome George and Donna to the committee, and thank you for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you for being here
Brad,
today. Yeah, go ahead.
you do need to ask for a motion to actually appoint them. So you as chair are bringing the names forward for concurrence by the full board.
All right, that is an action item. So at this time.
Question.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Make a point. Why not have a time when George could present, if you still do it, George, your trolley presentation, where you're dressed as a trolleyman and you talk about the history of the trolley in town? Are you still doing that? What did he say?
So I don't think that would fall under what this committee does. But if the full board would like to see that and we want that on an agenda at some future board meeting, we could talk about that.
I think we need to get him over to the Champaign County History Museum. That would be really good.
Christmas time when you have somebody put on I'm not
Okay.
sure. Just a thought.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
You want to go up to a microphone, George? Hit that button on the right.
On the right.
You're live.
Not used to your fancy electronics. We didn't have that in my day. I did write a paragraph that I think perhaps you have, Bradley.
I do.
Summarizes my experience and places me. Let me just put it this way. If anybody has any questions about streetcars in Champaign-Urbana, I'm the guy to ask.
He knows the history.
He knows the history backwards and forwards. It's beautiful.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it. Thank you both for being a part of the committee. At this time, I would ask for a motion to appoint Donna Tanner Harold and George Friedman Jr. to the MTD's Decennial Committee on Local Government Efficiency.
So move.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to appoint Donna Tanner Harold and George Friedman Jr. to the MTD's Decennial Committee on Local Government Efficiency. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You are appointed. Thank you, and thank you for being here both. Our next item is our Developmental Services Center contract. Carl.
Thank you. This is our annual award of an agreement with Developmental Services Center. They provide ADA accessible transportation services for their client base, and so it offers a higher level of service for those individuals than what we could offer because they know them and they work with them, they live in their facilities, that kind of thing. So it's a good arrangement because we have an employee shortage, especially now, but they can provide a better level of service to those clients than we can. So this is our annual agreement.
Questions on this item from the board? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion in a second.
I move that we approve this contract with the Developmental Services Center.
I'll second Margaret's motion.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the contract with Developmental Services Center. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Our next item is our annual contract with the Urbana School District 116 for their transportation agreement for school year 23-24. Carl.
Speaking of annual agreements, this is our annual intergovernmental agreement with Urbana School District 116. We provide transportation services for their middle and high schools. This agreement, we've been doing this since 1987 with Urbana, and we completely changed the agreement this year with the school district because historically this this agreement has been based on enrollment, whereas the Champaign School District is based on hours of service that we provide. And so when the Champaign School District would like us to do something different, if they have needs in other areas or whatever, we can make changes, and the cost reflects those changes, either goes up or goes down depending on the change. With Urbana, they would ask for changes, and we just paid on enrollment. And so the level of service that we provided, we never got compensated for that. And so in conversations with the school district, they were very understanding of our desire to have the agreement reflect the level of service that we provide. And so this is a bit of a bump this year versus previous years. Not a significant, not a great one. It's about $20,000 roughly, but they were willing to do that and very understanding of the reasoning and the need behind mirroring the Champaign School District agreement.
Questions on this item from the board? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the District 116 Transportation Agreement with Urbana School District.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Transportation Agreement with Urbana School District. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. And our next item is our agreement with the Champaign Unit 4 School District. Carl.
And so this is the Champaign version of that school district agreement. It is the same as previous years, except for updated hourly rate, but the service is the same.
With that, I'll ask for any board questions. Seeing none, a motion and a second on this item.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the contract with the Champaign Unit 4 School District for the transportation agreement. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Our next item is a change to our travel policy for travel expenses. Carl.
Okay, we just recently updated this, but Alan asked us to bring it back again, which actually turned out to be fortuitous timing. So we have revised this to reflect Alan's suggestion that we specify that Willard Airport is our preferred airport for staff to use when traveling. But we also took the opportunity to make an additional change when we have our hourly mechanics technicians go to the bus manufacturing facilities to do line inspections. They are sometimes gone for an inordinate amount of time. I'll just say that. And they basically are living in St. Cloud, Minnesota or Anniston, Alabama for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, and tabulating all the receipts for every meal that they have, or the laundromat, or, I mean, every little thing is just a pain in the neck. And so we made a change in this that for those travel purposes, for line inspectors, we're just going to do a per diem. And that way those folks don't have to keep track of every little slip of paper over multiple weeks of period of time. I think it's better for them. I know it's better for the maintenance staff who don't have to go through and check everything at the end of the trip. And it's easier for MTD. We can just pay them the per diem before they go, money in their pocket, and they pay their own expenses.
Questions on this item? Al.
Yes, thank you. The airport's near and dear to my heart. It's a part of transportation. I think the MTD does a great job in what we do, and I think they do a great job with the airport as well. But that's neither here nor there right now. But this I think is a good start for recommending to employees that they use at Willard. It's preferred that employees travel. I'd just like your admin part of your staff to take a look at On point 2, travel must be accomplished in the most expedient and cost-efficient way. And it would be good to do an annual cost of what happens when somebody decides to drive to Indy, lodge overnight because the flight isn't the same day as when they are traveling, and do a cost analysis. When we say preferred, and then then 2 kind of contradicts that, most expedient and cost efficient. When you add in the mileage that you pay to the person and the overnight that's possible there, it just seems to me we really need to utilize Willard more often. I wish the university would do that. I wish the university would probably fill, I think from what I've been told on the committee I'm on with airport, that probably could handle another flight or 2 capacity of just insisting that, you know, university employees fly out of Willard. But they have a lot of freedom in doing that, and there's a lot of research dollars that they have no control over, and I don't want to get into it, but bottom line is we're better off having an airport that we have consistent airlines that's going to take people everywhere in the world, and if we stop doing that because of somebody's preference of their rewards and their miles and things like that, we're going to lose an airline, the only airline we have. So I really think it, maybe just next year, take a look at what an analysis would be to show preferred is going to be Willard. Thank you.
Yeah, I can tell you, Alan, I don't know what the actual percentage is, and we could go back over the last 12 months and look, or the last, whatever, 5 years. I'll bet 90% of our travel is out of Willard. I can tell you that up until recently, 100% of my travel, and I travel more than any other employee at the district, has been out of Willard.
If you can believe this, the amount of leakage, which is people that fly somewhere other than Willard in this community, is 75%. 75%. Imagine what kind of airport we would have if we could have, you know, just, we get the business class, but we don't get the recreational flyer because of the cost of one single airline. If we bring in a low-cost air carrier, I don't want, this is MTD. But the point being is we can do a better job, and I think we need to be a leader in that. Thank you.
I vote for having MTD run the airport.
I very rarely make motions, but I'll make that motion, yes.
Phil, did you have something?
Oh, I think the one thing that Alan left out there too would be, you know, time lost, assuming our employees are actually gainfully employed by us, is more than what they're paid. So if we're paying somebody, you know, $30 an hour, we ought to be getting $60 or $100 an hour worth of productivity out of them, right? So if you spend 2 hours in the car to Indy and 2 hours back, that can make up the cost of a ticket real quick. You know, and even if you got a layover at Willard, if you're at the airport on a layover, you can work on your laptop or be present in some way. Can't really do that while you're driving. Well, you oughtn't do that while you're driving down 74. So, yeah, and I think those are really great points, Alan. I never thought about it like that.
We would actively discourage them while they're driving to Indianapolis to be working while they drive.
All right. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know where we're at on this. Are we still waiting?
I think we just need a motion.
I think we need a motion on this. So, I'll ask for a motion on the changes to the ordinance and policy to establish reimbursement for travel expenses.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the changes to the travel policy. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Our next item is an update to the web accessibility policy.
I don't know, am I on my own here? No. Ryan's coming, okay. So Ryan Blackman, our Technology Services Director, will give this presentation.
Good afternoon. In December of 2021, the board adopted a web accessibility policy. This policy sets standards and requirements for MTD's web presence to be accessible. What we're bringing to you today is a very small adjustment to that policy. The original policy specified that the special services manager would be a web accessibility coordinator at the district, so a person who was sort of the point person for all things web accessibility that would field, if there was a complaint about web accessibility, that would field those complaints and organize a response to them and just generally be an advocate for web accessibility within the district. As you may know, we've had some turnover in that position, and that led us to look at that policy again and come to the conclusion that while we want to have a web accessibility coordinator, we don't necessarily want it to be tied to a specific position. We want to have the flexibility to appoint a web accessibility coordinator who's best suited for that role and has the capacity and all of that to do that. So that is essentially what this change is that we're asking you to adopt today is doing. It's giving the managing director the authority to appoint a web accessibility coordinator without specifying the specific staff position that will be appointed to that position. The other change to the policy is just a small addition at the end that allows us to make small changes to the policy that don't fundamentally change the meaning of the policy, so that we don't have to bring it to the board every time we want to make a small change like this.
Questions on this policy change from the board? Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve this recommendation for a change to the accessibility policy.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to update the web accessibility policy. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Ryan. Our next item is a contract for electrical wiring upgrade to the maintenance facility at 803 East University.
Thank you, Ryan. And for this one, Josh Bierbaum, our maintenance director.
Good afternoon. Josh Bierbaum, I'm your Maintenance and Facilities Director. So I'm going to talk to you just for briefly here about our maintenance facilities air compressor needs. So we have currently a main air compressor that operates the shop. It's approximately 15 years old. In addition to that, we have a backup air compressor that is in excess of 30 years old that is not in good condition currently. And about a year and a half ago, our previous facilities director looked at replacing that backup compressor. And it was found at that time that the electrical feeds, breaker box, going into that backup compressor and into our main air compressor are insufficient. And there's actually some scorched lugs, and you can see the sheathing on the wiring is beginning to fray and has been hot. And so that presents a fire hazard for the entire building. So what we're proposing here is a contract with Potter Electric to go through, replace all of the feeder cables that come down into the breaker boxes, add a breaker box, and increase the lug sizes to accommodate a new compressor. This was looked at by GHR Engineering, so they went through, wrote out the specs, obtained 3 quotes from Potter Electric, Davis Electric, and Current Solutions of the Midwest. And we found that Potter Electric was the least expensive bid by far, and it satisfies all requirements for the job. The first phase would be to get this wiring upgraded before we can even look at replacement of that backup air compressor. And having the redundancy of the main compressor and a good backup air compressor is a requirement, mostly because of our bus lifts, pneumatic tools, any of our tire work that has to be done, emptying waste oil barrels, all of that is driven off of pneumatics. So having supplied air pressure is a requirement at all times for our shop. So this contract for Potter appears to satisfy all of our needs.
Questions from the board for Josh on this item, Phil?
2 questions for you, I guess. First one would be, I don't know, sometimes when you're starting motors like that, VFD might help avoid some of those, I guess, peaks in current, right? It's a 3-phase motor, so we wouldn't have to do quite as aggressive an upgrade if maybe we looked at a VFD controller instead of just a simple switch. You might already have that. It would probably also increase efficiency. My other question, I guess, to go with that would be, what is our shop air pressure? I know we were having an issue a few years ago where I think it was the 11s or the 17s brought in some bigger tires that took higher pressure, and it was actually above what we were able to produce off of those compressors. I didn't know if we'd come to a resolution of that, or if that's something that we're still sort of working on for this next step.
Yeah, we have a regulator that is set up to go above the 120 PSI, so we can go up to 150 PSI currently, which will inflate those tires, but the compressor we're looking at has a max capacity of 190 PSI. We would never need to be that high, but it has the capability of doing that. What you'd mentioned on like a VFD, like a variable drive, stepping power up and down, the biggest issue is, and I've got pictures, I don't know who would want to see or not see, but anyway, the three, your main lug wires coming in from the feet upstairs, the actual wire itself is too small, and you can see on the edges where it's already frayed and the sheathing's starting to pull away. So when we had GHR look at it, that was pretty much their recommendation, is that wiring is already too small, so even stepping the power up or down is not going to change the fact that the wiring's too small. So that's why we kind of engage them to write out all the specs so that we're sure that what we're doing is future-proof, not only for this compressor, but for subsequent ones in the future.
Understood. I would just say, if you meet with GHR, ask them about doing a VFD if we do a new compressor, because it does, I think it would help extend the wiring and the compressor and the breaker life, because, I mean, we're just beating the hell out of this thing, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah, with the amount of air connections and tools and just everything we have in the shop that runs on air, I mean, that compressor runs frequent. And the idea behind this backup compressor is that right now, the main compressor runs pretty much all the time. The backup compressor hardly ever comes on. The idea is having a transfer switch so you can kind of offload and share the load so that it will increase the life of both compressors. So.
Additional questions from the board for Josh on this item? And this is going to be federally funded 100%, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, okay. If there are no other questions, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve this item.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve a contract with Potter Electric Service for an electrical wiring upgrade at 803 East University. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Our final action item today is Resolution 2023-4, which is the Downstate Operating Assistance Program Grant Agreement with the State of Illinois. Carl.
As was referenced several times during the budget presentation, we apply for the Downstate Operating Assistance Program through the state of Illinois, and this is just the annual resolution that the state requires that is you authorizing me to execute the agreement, the grant agreement, the program agreement for operating funds.
Questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve Resolution 2023-4, the DOPE Grant Agreement.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 2023-4, the Downstate Operating Assistance Program Grant Agreement. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Vasella,
Aye.
Hannon,
Yes.
Nudo, Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. That was our last action item for today. Our next regular Board of Trustees meeting and public hearing on the FY 2024 Budget and Appropriation Ordinance will be Wednesday, June 28th, 2023 at 3 o'clock right here at the Illinois Terminal. This time I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.